This video documentary discusses the early history of Israel. Through this documentary, we highlight key elements like the Balfour Declaration, Zionism movement, Israeli independence, etc. Let's head into the documentary. Israel. It's the only Jewish nation in the world and it didn't officially exist before 1948. This is the history of Israel and Palestine. Through the centuries, the land we now call Israel and Palestine changed terrains many times as different groups of people battled for control over the area over time. The establishment of Jewish, Christian, and Muslims made the land, specifically Jerusalem, a uniquely holy place. So for about 1000 years in Middle Ages, the Arabs always held control of the area and actually left both of them peacefully with the Jews. In fact, it were the Christians during the war who massacred and persecuted the Jews and Muslims. Many people associate Israel with its conflict with Palestine, a violent dispute of land, political control, and resources. To understand this, we have to look a few thousand years ago. Both Jews and Muslims have strong religious and cultural ties to this region, dating back about 4000 years ago to Abraham, considering the father of the two religions.
Early history of Israel. The history of the Jewish people and their roots in the land of Israel spans 35 centuries. It is here that the cultural and religious identity of the Jewish people was formed. In the first century, when the Jewish civilization in Israel was already over 1000 years old, Rome destroyed the Holy Temple in Jerusalem and conquered the Jewish nation. At this time, the Romans renamed the region Palestine and exiled a portion of the population. However, some Jews remained. There were two important kings during this time. Number 1, King David. King David was born around 1000 BCE. David was the eighth son and youngest of Jesse from the tribe of Judah. David reigned for 40 years in one of the highest and most prosperous periods in Israel's history, called by many the Golden Age of Israel. Having famously killed the Philistine giant Goliath, he was an aide at the court of Saul, until the monarch's jealousy forced David into outlawry. After Saul's death, David became king of Judah. King Solomon. Solomon flourished 10th century BC, son and successor of David. Nearly all that is known about him comes from the Bible.
In 1881, the first large-scale migration of Jews had seen in the Palestine area and had made their permanent settlements and started living there because it was a holy area for Jews, that is, Jerusalem is the holy place for Jewish people. The entire area was known as a Palestine at that time, which was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The story begins thousands of years ago. Hitler how terribly treated the Jews, but the atrocities against the Jews begins in the past. It is said that Jesus Christ was born in a Jewish family when the Crusades happened, so the Christians killed the Jews in the large number. Due to various rumors, there was a rampant hatred against the Jews. The hatred towards the Jews was not only because of the religious reasons but also they were being seen different ethnicity as well. Hence, because of those all reasons, Jews living around the world began feeling that no country accept them as their own. If they wanted to live peacefully, they would need to create their own country, to create a Jewish country. In 1945, after the World War II is finally over, Europe was filled with tens of millions of refugees. 2 years later, Great Britain lost controls in the Southeast Asia. The UN settlement worked with Great Britain to split the land into two states, one for the Jewish, that is Israel, and one for the Arab, that is Palestine. The Jews accepted the plan and declared independence in Israel. But the Arab states in the region saw this plan as just more European colonialism. They didn't accept the plan and declared war. During the peace negotiation, a ceasefire line was drawn in a greening that is known as a green line. In the meantime, Many of the Arab inhabitants left their homes because of the war and promised the Arab leaders that the Jewish would be defeated quickly, so that they planned to return when they won the war, and the Jews had been thrown into the sea. But Arab lost, so several hundred Arabs had become refugees. Later on, they would be called as the Palestine refugees. On the other hand, at about the same time, 850,000 Jews were forced out of their homes all over the Middle East. Jews lived in the Arab world for thousands of years. But when the Arabs were defeated and the state of Israel, it was too much for the Arab regime. The Jewish and Arab conflicts emerged a ball-sort land in the Middle East, and both turned to European powers for help, so that the Jewish movement that emerged in the sought to establish Jewish domain in Israel and Palestine after almost 2000 years. The movement became known as Zionism. Until the end of 19th century, most of the Jews living outside Israel, Palestine assumed that they would be assimilated in one way or another. In 1896, he published a book, Dear Judistan, the Jewish State. He organized the first Zionist World Congress in Switzerland in 1897, and Zionism as a politic movement was born. The goal of the movement was to create a legal home in the Palestine for Jewish people.
Israel today is a small country in West Asia about the size of one of India's northeastern states, Meghalaya or Manipur. Today, the population of Israel is mostly Jewish, though there are minorities of Christians and Muslims. In 1917, the British government announced the Balfour Declaration, hoping to gain Jewish support for World War I, which promised the establishment in Palestine a national home for the Jewish people. This was problematic because in 1916 the British had secretly made a deal with the French according to which after the war the Arab territories would be divided and Palestine would be in control of the British. The Arabs in Palestine opposed the declaration, fearing that a Jewish homeland in the region would mean subjugation for the Palestinians. The British, after the First World War, established a colony in Palestine, maintaining that they would rule the area until the Palestinians were ready to govern themselves. This was called Mandatory Palestine as it was according to the League of Nations mandate. During the course of World War II, many Jews escaping Europe from the Holocaust were brought to Palestine illegally by Jewish organizations. Tensions escalated and the British handed over the problem to the newly established United Nations. In 1947, the United Nations voted to establish separate Palestinian and Jewish states in the region dividing Palestine. This plan was rejected by the Arabs. In May 1948, Israel had declared an independent state with David Ben-Gurion as the prime minister. Following this declaration in 1948, the Arab-Israeli War broke out.
The Arab-Israeli War of 1948 broke out when 5 Arab nations invaded territory in the former Palestinian Mandate immediately following the announcement of the independence of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948. On November 29, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, which is also known as the Partition Resolution, that would divide Great Britain's former Palestinian Mandate into Jewish and Arab states. Under the resolution, the area of religious significance surrounding Jerusalem would remain under international control administered by the United Nations. Votes came in, 33 countries approved, 13 countries voted against, and 10 countries completely denied from voting. The United Nations resolution sparked conflict between Jewish and Arab groups with Palestine. Fighting began with attacks by irregular bands of Palestinian Arabs attached to local units of Arab Liberation Army composed of volunteers from Palestine and neighboring Arab countries. These groups launched their attacks against Jewish cities, settlements, and armed forces. The goal of the Arabs was initially to block the partition resolution and to prevent the establishment of the Jewish state. The Jews, on the other hand, hoped to gain control over the territory allotted to them under the partition plan. Tensions were high on the ground. which kept increasing with the massacre at Deir Yassin. This started the mass exodus of Palestine, and at the same time, the Jewish immigration encouraged by the Zionists was on the rise. Arabs were becoming increasingly frustrated as the atrocities kept growing, and the promise of an independent Arab state was nowhere in the sight. Israel declaring its official independence was a triggering point. After Israel declared its independence on May 14, 1948, the fighting intensified with the other Arab forces joining the Palestinian Arabs in attacking territory in the former Palestinian Mandate. On the eve of May 14, the Arabs launched an air attack on Tel Aviv, which the Israelis resisted. This action was followed by the invasion of the former Palestinian Mandate by Arab armies from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. The British intervened in the conflict, but only in areas that had been designated as a part of the Arab state under the United Nations Partition Plan and the Corpus Separatum of Jerusalem. Though the United Nations brokered two ceasefires during the conflict, fighting continued into 1949. Israel and the Arab states did not reach any formal armistice agreements until February. Under separate agreements between Israel and the neighboring states of Egypt, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Syria, these bordering nations agreed to formal armistice lines. Israel gained some territory formally granted to Palestinian Arabs under the United Nations resolution in 1947.
The two-state solution. The two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict envisions an independent state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, west of the Jordan River. The boundary between the two states is still subject to dispute and negotiation, with Palestinian and Arab leadership insisting on the 1967 borders, which is not accepted by Israel. Historical background. In 1993, the Israeli government and the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) agreed on a plan to implement a two-state solution as a part of Oslo Accords, leading to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. Two-state solution proposed by the Oslo Accords was born out of a series of historical events. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Jews and Arabs both claimed the right to self-determination in historical Palestine. At first, attempt at partitioning the land in 1948 resulted in an Israeli state but no Palestinian state, and the West Bank and Gaza Strip fell under Jordanian and Egyptian rule, respectively. In the Sixth Day of War in 1967, Israel captured and occupied the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the other Arab territories, which in the aftermath led to the idea that Israel would exchange land it had captured for peace with its Arab neighbors, including eventually the Palestinians. The conflict originated with the election of the Islamist political party Hamas in 2005 and 2006 in the Gaza Strip and escalated with the split of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and the Hamas government in Gaza, and the following violent ousting of Fatah. Palestinian rocket attacks on Israel, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, and the joint Egyptian-Israeli blockade of Gaza have exacerbated the conflict. The international community considers indiscriminate attack on civilians and civilian structure that do not discriminate between civilians and military targets, which is illegal under international law.